said that Grandpa was been operated on and that he'd come through it. And then we ate. We'd all taken food over, and we had a big feed at Nida's, and they got quite hilarious and laughing and telling things that had happened in the past. But somehow I didn't feel good about things. I didn't join in much with that jolly laughing and things, and I didn't feel good about eating that early. I didn't really want to eat my food. I don't know, I didn't eat much if I ate any. But you kids had all fasted and gone to school, and I don't think you were supposed to eat school lunch. That's it, you weren't supposed to eat school lunch until after you found that Grandpa was all right. And we didn't have a phone or anything way of letting you know. I just told you to fast until, for Grandpa. And I think I just expected you to fast till lunch. But anyhow, when I came home that night about 7 o'clock, I got here about 6, I guess. And Cray went down to Mutual. You were sitting in the corner. Cray was gone to Mutual. And you were sitting in the corner. You weren't old enough to go. And you were just sitting over in the corner. And I said, Geffery, where's Cray? And you said, Mama, he ate. Cray already ate when he come home from school, and then he ate again before he went to Mutual. And I said, Geffery, haven't you eaten yet? And you said, no. I'm still going to fast for Grandpa till he gets better. And I said, oh, honey, I didn't mean for you to fast this long. I said, come here quick and Mom will give you something to eat. And you said, no, I want to still fast. And I said, no, you don't have to fast that long. Grandpa's had his operation now, and so you can end your fast. And you were quite reluctant to ever eat food. And after a while, just while you were eating, I guess almost, they came and said, Grandpa was worse. They wanted them all to come over to the hospital. They said there wasn't room for me. They was going to pick Herman up from Bryce, and they was only taking one car, and as many as could go over were going over, but they called them to come over, and pretty soon we got word that Grandpa had passed away. And you looked up at me and you said, Mama, we just didn't fast long enough. Said, I know what was wrong. We just didn't fast long enough. Well, it wasn't very long after that till you started getting sick. And I didn't really know what was the matter with you. But I knew that something seriously wrong was the matter, and I took you over to Dr. Duggan's. And I think it was Duggan's. I don't know. Duggan's and Mason were working interchangeably, you know. If one of them wasn't there, the other took the patient, and I don't just remember which one it was. But anyhow, he said, what was wrong? And I said, well, this little boy's sick, and I don't know what's wrong. I said, I don't think he's got the flu or a cold. He don't seem to have much of a cold, but he's sick. And so he said, oh, he's got flu because that's what's going around. You had a fever. I could tell you kind of had a fever, and you didn't feel good, and you had a headache and some other symptoms, and so you didn't feel very good. And so he said, well, I'll give him a shot. So he gave you some penicillin or something and sent you back over here. And you didn't feel good at all. You got so that you couldn't keep your food down. You couldn't even keep water down. And we went over and again. And you couldn't go to school. He said, no, if you just couldn't keep your food down, maybe we better not have you. I think I saw Mason part of the time, and he'd say he was the one that always had to keep him home and be careful. I think he told me not to send you to school. And I said, I don't think he's had the flu at all. And he said, what do you think he's had? And I said, well, look at his eyes. They're yellow. The white of his eyes are yellow. And I said, he's starting to look kind of yellow on his skin to me. And the doctor looked at me and said, well, what do you think's wrong? And I said, well, I think he's either got yellow jaundice or hepatitis or something on that order. And he said, well, we can find out pretty soon. And I don't know what he did to make a test of some kind, and he come back and he said, well, he has hepatitis, but he says it isn't the kind that's catching. And so I said, should I isolate him? Should I, quarantine you? He said, no, he can't give it to anybody. But I, to this day, think that drinking out of that canteen with Grandpa while you were doing that, and it was not only a week or two before, if he said it, well, we got along just fine until I guess you was 2.5, 3, maybe 3.5 months old. And we had trouble then, because when we plastered in the basement, they put the plaster on too thick. And somehow, along in the middle of the winter, when you was 2 or 3 months old, the plaster fell down around the kitchen stove. I guess it got too warm or too cold or something, and it let loose a big patch of it. And it could let a draft down through there from the top. And so Herman had the Bob Riding, who was able to plaster. Herman had to go back to Grand Canyon, but he went and hired Bob to come and put plaster on it. And Bob told us, he said, now don't have a fire any more than you can help for a day or two till this dries, or it might come back off. So we kind of kept the house a little cooler, and the first thing I knew, you had this big abscess on your neck, a big swollen gland. Well, I did everything I knew of to do for anything like that, and anything anybody told me for a day or two, and I finally got frightened and decided I better take you over to Duggan's. So we went over there, and he said, yes, it was an abscess, that it wasn't quite ready to lance. It'd have to be lanced before it would heal. And he said, go home for 2 or 3 days, and I think he had me hot pack it for a while, as I remember. And I did this, and Uncle Loram used to come by in the evening with his catnip tea. He'd just do anything to help you with your babies, especially in the winter. And I did give you a little bit of that. Maybe it did quiet you a little, and I found out afterwards it's a mild drug. But I didn't give you enough to ever get you hooked. But anyway, it kind of soothed you a little bit, and it soothed his feelings because he was so proud to bring his catnip and tell you how to make a little catnip tea and give it to you in a teaspoon, just about so warm, And he said they'll just really sleep. It'll just help them. And I did that a little bit along with it. But then when I took him back to have it lanced, I knew I couldn't stand it. He was just going to, cut it and squeeze the pus out of it. And he said, Mother, knowing you, I think maybe you better step out in the hall while I do this. And I could just hear you give out a scream. And then that was about all you did, was just one big scream. And I was crying as hard as you were. I came back in, and he kind of laughed at me. He said, I don't think he felt it too much, And he told me he just packed it clear full of gauze, just oodles of it down in there, as tight as he could pack it. I guess it's so it would drain up all that poisoning into the gauze. And he told me how many days I'd have to leave it before I could take that gauze out. Or he said you could bring him back over here, and I'll take it out. And he'd left a little end there that you could pull it out. And he said, don't pull it out slow, because that'll hurt him. He said, when you pull it, just pull it out real quick. I just dreaded that late week at nights worrying. And I thought, I can't hire somebody to take me back over there again. And the roads were snowy and slick and everything. And I thought, I've got to do it. He told me you can do it yourself as well as I can. And he must have given me some kind of medication to put on it or something afterwards. But Mother Pollock came in, and I told her, I said, I wish you would come over tomorrow morning when I have to pull this gauze out. I said, I'm just kind of afraid to pull it out. I said, I could pull it out better if somebody was here watching me. And the kids was all to school. And so when I got ready to pull it out, I just pulled it right out and had no problem. But it was really hard for me to do that. And Mother said, why, you just did that slick as a whistle. She said, you're just as good a nurse as Tuggins. And she just wagged on me. Well, you finally got over that, but I always felt like you took a little cold from that damp plaster. Now, we didn't keep the house cold because I kept a little fire in here, but he told me not to make a fire in the kitchen. And I always thought it was that wet plaster that did that because I kept you quite even temperature all the time other than that. And that was the problem I had about that. I can't tell you the date that you were blessed or any of the things like that. I used to take you to the clinic regularly as often as they held it, and you had your shots like you should have, and your weight and your measure, and you had a clip of your hair. I never did let your hair grow long like I did Jeff's and Lyle's because it wasn't curly, but we cut your hair when you was old enough to have your hair cut, and I had a clip of that and a trace of your hand and the little bead thing that they had around with Cray Pollock on it, or whatever, a Pollock baby or something on it. I don't think we'd found out a name for you. Well, we hadn't. But when we got home and was wondering about it, every name I wanted to name you, Herman didn't want. And so I thought, well, the only way we can ever get the baby named is for me to just give in and let it be named whatever he wants. And he went over to Mother's, and she, at that time, she had a friend who had a son that went down with one of the ships during the war, and he was buried at sea, or just died and was left in the, just there in the ocean. And so they always felt so bad about that, and his name was Cray. And so Mother told Herman, why don't you name him Cray? She said, I've always thought that was a pretty name ever since she'd heard it. And so Herman thought maybe to please Mother, we ought to name him Cray. And I had the hardest time naming you Cray, or calling you Cray. It just seemed like a grown-up name on a little baby. And I'd look at you and say, Cray, Cray. And I thought, how can I ever call him Cray? And after you were named when you were quite young. I can't remember just how long it was before I took you to church and had you named. But anyway, I used to lay down on the bed. The doctor said, now when you nurse him, lay down on the bed and you can rest while he's nursing. And because he used to say, rest, rest, rest. And I said, how can you do that with a whole family of kids? And he said, well, when you nurse the baby, lay down and your body rests. And so that's what I was doing. And when I was there alone with you, I'd lay there and I'd look at you as you nursed, and I'd say, Cray, Cray, Cray. And I was trying to get used to saying the name and feeling like it fit you. And before you was even, it was so cute. You'd stop nursing and look right up at me and say, And if I'd say Cray the next time, you'd say, And that don't sound hardly feasible, but that happened. By this time, I think Herman was working in the timber, sawing timber with some of the men, as I remember, and they go away and camp and only come home at weekends, so I did have the responsibility of everything here at home that winter, and it was a lot of hard work and responsibility, but I lived through it and took care of you. And I never did impose the children on Mother Pollock or ask her to tend you, excepting one time when I had to go over to Panguitch on a Relief Society convention. It was a tri-state convention. And it was when you were about 4 years old, I'd say, and the rest of the kids were all in school. And I had to go before Oline would get home from school, about a half an hour or an hour. And I told her the minute that she got home from school to go over to Grandma's and pick you up, that I'd take you over just before we left for Panguitch. And so I took you over, or sent you over with a note. And it asked Grandma if she could please let you just play around there. You'd be fed and everything. You didn't take any care, but just to know that somebody was watching over you. And then Oline would pick you up. And she sent word back, no, that she was busy, that she wouldn't be home. And so I didn't know whether she didn't want me to start sending my kids for her to tend or whether she'd be away. I don't know where she's going. But I said, then I asked and she said yes, you could play there to her place, and she'd watch for Oline and catch her when she came down the street. So that's what happened. But you came back and you said to me, Grandma can't tend me. And I said, why not? And she said, because she and Grandpa are going to bury their bull. And they had just gotten this purebred or thoroughbred, I guess it's purebred, bull, a huge big bull, and paid an enormous price for it, and they were keeping it locked up there in their kraal. And I thought, oh, it's got into the alfalfa leaves or something and bloated and died. And I was feeling so bad. And she said, Grandma said she can't tell me because they're going to bury their bull. And so I saw Mother in a day or two, and I said, oh, I feel so bad about you losing your bull. And she said, we haven't lost the bull. And I said, well, Cray, when he came home, he said, you couldn't tend him the other day because you and Grandpa were going to bury your bull. And she began to laugh. She said, oh, I told him that we were going bull burying. They were going to pick berries along the river, the bullberries along the river to make jelly with. But he thought it was burying their bull. Mother Pollock was quite good to drop in when the kids were sick. And she'd make a few comments about, maybe this would be good, Farmer. If I was you, I'd do such and such. Or, just give little bits of advice or something that was helpful. But she never did come in and just take over and say, here, let me put hot packs on them or anything for you. She never did do that. And she never ever did any work in my house. She never washed a dish or swept a floor or did one thing. But it was always nice to have her come in. She didn't stay long usually because she had her work and responsibilities. Well, I didn't expect her to, but I did appreciate that. And I loved her really a lot. And she loved all the family. But she would come and kind of give her opinion, and it was generally, she was pretty wise, and she knew some things to do, like poultices and things to put on it that was really helpful, and that helped me out a lot with raising the children. And I really appreciate her and love her. I also appreciate you children very much for what you did to help. Gail and Lyle were really good to work on tasks outside. They'd get the wood, they'd get the kindling, and they'd feed the pig, and Gail would milk the cow and do things like that outdoor. But Gary and Oline usually worked together on the indoor tasks, and they were really good. So I couldn't have raised the family without the help of my family, and I never once had any hired help. Never had anybody ever come in, and I never ever hired a babysitter and took to take over and tend my babies. If it was at night when I couldn't go and take them and they weren't supposed to be there, I stayed home with them. So you weren't neglected, any of you. Cray did about the things that little kids do, and he played a lot with Dennis. He used to like to play with Dennis, and he did some cute things, and he said some cute things. I think I've got them on the tape already. I don't know, but this is kind of the starting, because I did tape over it and ruin it and kind of had to piecemeal this in. So I hope that I've got this pretty good. But I will tell you this much, that Cray always thought that Hope Winch was his grandma. He would never give up for years and years that Hope wasn't his grandma, because she was Dennis's, and then Mother Pollock was his and Dennis's too. But the way they differentiated between them was the green grandma and the white grandma, according to the color of their houses. They never said Grandma Pollock or Grandma Winch. It was always the green grandma or the white grandma. And he always said, I guess he had lots of little treats and things as he went there with Dennis, just the same as they did when they went over to Mother Pollock's. But he always claimed her for his grandma. About this time, Gail and Gary were in elementary school, and they were having gym. And the gym teacher said that they would have some basketball teams if they would get some little trunks, colored trunks and tops, so that they could have outfits, uniforms, and to see if their mothers would make them something they could wear for gym. Well, they came home wanting these, so I went down to the store and got some cloth, the best that I thought would make it, and came home and cut them out and was sitting in the basement after they'd all had supper, the kids were playing out. It was kind of early, and I'd put Cray to bed, and I was sewing on these gym trunks, and just as happy as I could be, because I was getting them pretty well along, and they were pleasing the kids, and that's the thing that made me happy, was when the kids were happy. And all at once, on them in the evening, and Axa Shakespeare came over here, and she said, "Oh, do you know the whole back of your place is on fire?" Oh, that scared me to death. We went rushing out there. I put Cray to bed in the basement. He was in his crib. And so we were living in the basement. And we went rushing out there and started to yell, "Fire, fire," and people down at the show house came out and came running up, and they got hoses and things and squirted, and the whole wood pile, a pitchy wood pile, was afire, and it burnt the trees and the fence and was coming toward the house. And by that time, I just tried to work to get the people getting the fire out and doing what I could and getting the things they needed, like hose and buckets and whatever, because we didn't have a fire engine at that time. And I had just forgotten about Cray. And I said, "Oh, my baby's in the basement. What if it gets to the house?" And Olene says, "No, he isn't, Mama. I took him over to Axe's." Oh, I said, "Olene, bless your heart." She'd worried about that more than I had, even though she wasn't his mother. And Cray said some funny things, and he did some funny things. One time, when he was a little older, before they went to school even, he and Dennis to go down and play school with little Afton. She'd be the teacher, and she was pretty bossy, and they minded her pretty good, but she'd let them write and paint and do this, and she had school for them in the summertime. And every morning after breakfast, they'd take off before I could get a hold of him to keep him there for the day almost, and we'd miss him, and he'd be down to Afton and Nina's. And I said, "Aunt Nina will get tired of you coming down there. I don't want you going down there anymore, unless you ask Mama." But that didn't faze him. And so he'd gone away again, and we'd had to come down and bring him back up home. And I said, "Cray, I know what I'm going to do." I threatened to paddle him. I said, "I'll spank you if you go down anymore." I said, "This is your home, and this is where you belong up here. I don't want you going down there so much." But he and Dennis would get together, and away they'd go. And Nina says, "Oh, let him come. It just keeps Afton home," and she's satisfied while she's teaching him and everything. But Cray thought that was good stuff, and so he decided that that's what he'd do. He'd go back and have school about every day. She wanted him to come. She'd tell him, "Come tomorrow, and I'll come tomorrow." And this time I said, "Cray, I know what I'm going to do. If you run away anymore, I'm going to get a little bell, and I'm going to put it on a strap and put it around your neck. And then when you go down the street, it'll ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling, and they'll say, 'Oh, Cray's running away.'" And he looked quite serious. And he said, "Oh, but I'll take it off. I'll unbuckle the strap." And I said, "Well, but I'm going to get this body man that welds. I'll have him weld it on, and then you can't take it off." And he looked sad for a few minutes, and then pretty soon said, "Well, Mama, I'll just hold to the dinger." And that was one cute thing he said. And then another thing, he and Dennis, when they were quite little, and wanted some bottles. I said, "What do you want bottles for?" He says, "We're going to catch some bees." I said, "You better not try to catch bees. They'll sting you." "No, they won't. We'll have the lid, and we'll just get them in the bottle, and then we'll put the lid on real quick before they can fly out. That's what we'll do." And I said, "We'll have to be awful careful." They went down to the cherry tree where there's a lot of bees, and pretty soon I heard Cray just a-crying. And I went down there, and he'd been stung by this bee, and I said, "I told you the bees would sting you if you caught them." And he said, "It didn't cry when I caught it. It didn't sting me when I caught it." And I said, "Well, what stung you then?" He said, "It stung me when I was trying to get the honey out of him." When he first got big enough to have a birthday party, I said, "Now, who do you want to invite to your party?" And he must have taken a real like to Earl Jolly for some reason. I don't know why. Earl is a likable person, but then he wasn't that close to Earl or so associated with him or anything. But I said, who do you want to come to your birthday party? And he said, I know who I want to come. And I said, who? And he said, everybody in this town and Earl Jolly. And so that's the way he felt about Earl Jolly. And then one time when he hadn't started the school, it was before Geff was even born. And I had to go away on some Relief Society business. I used to take him to Relief Society with me all the time because I was the president. And, both of my counselors lived at the bottom of town. And I'd always get him in his old snowsuit, and we'd walk all the way down there to have a confab with them to decide what we was going to do and get it planned, and then back. And he got pretty tired of traipsing to the bottom of town every once in a while for Relief Society. And then I'd take him to Relief Society meeting with me, and he'd sit on the seat on the front row, not up where the presidency sat, but on the very front row of the seat. And he'd have to fold his arms and sit still. And when Oline got out of school, she'd come down and get him and take him back up home. But school and Relief Society times didn't quite match, and so there'd be a while there that he'd just have to sit still. And he was pretty good about it, but I think he didn't like it very good because every day when he'd get up, he'd kind of sigh and he'd say, Mama, is it Relief Society today? If I said no, why, he brightened right up. But if I said, yes, it's Relief Society today, why, he was quite crestfallen. When Cray was quite young, he had a sore throat. And it was before he went to school. And I made him a bed here on the couch, and he was staying home and not playing around, He was just on the couch. And I had scrambled the last of the eggs that I had for the kids' breakfast that morning. But he didn't want anything. He said he didn't want anything. But after they'd been gone, excuse me, and after they'd been gone to school a while, he decided maybe he'd like something. I said, Cray, is there anything you'd like? Some juice or some anything? And he said, well, could you make me an eggnog? And I said, oh, Geff, Cray, I could have done. But Mama scrambled every egg she had in this house for the kids for breakfast. And I can't make you an eggnog. And he said, well, Mama, just make me the nog then. Like I did with all the kids, we had his tonsils taken out, made arrangements to have his tonsils taken out before he started school. And when he got over there, he looked so clean and pleasant and brave and precious as he went into the operating room. But when he came out, he looked so docile and white and pale because he'd had a terrible experience, and it frightened me nearly to pieces because he hemorrhaged so bad. And Dr. Duggan tried, they did for quite a while to stop it. They tried to packing it, and when they take the packing out it'd bleed again. They cauterized it, they finally gave him vitamin K and packed it and all, but every time it'll start to bleed again. And so he said, he came in and said he's having trouble. They couldn't stop Cray's bleeding, and he couldn't take the other little boy in until they got Cray taken care of. It was another little Brinkerhoff boy that was there for his operation. And he said, where's his father? And I said, well, he's down in the Grand Canyon. He said, if we can't get this stopped pretty soon, we're going to have to send for him. And that really frightened me. But finally, it did kind of stop. I said, is it dangerous? And he said, you bet it's dangerous. He could hemorrhage right to death. And I said, well, is it his tonsils that's bleeding? He said, no, that they thought when they took out his adenoids, it had made clipped a little artery nose, and it was bleeding from there, but they just couldn't get it stopped. But finally, vitamin K took hold, and altogether they did get it stopped, and they didn't think they were going to let me come home that night. And I hadn't made arrangements to tell the kids or anything that was over here. Oline was with them. But I worried about that because I didn't want to leave them alone, but I hurried and I thought, well, I'll go phone them and tell them. And then he said, no. He said, just wait a while and we'll see if we can take this packing out. And if it doesn't bleed, you can take him home carefully. And so we was real happy when they got that stopped and he got able to come home that night. Some occasion, and I had a suds in the sink, and he came home and his little shirt that he'd had on was pretty dirty. It was on a Friday night, and he got it quite dusty and dirty. And Herman had gotten the kids these little bright crinkle crepe shirts, the big flowery, bright colored ones, and we called them their Hawaiian shirts. I don't know if they were, but I thought I could just suds that out in that water and then it'd be fresh. He liked to wear it. He always wanted it. And I said, I'll pass me your shirt and I'll just suds it out in this water and then you can wear it again Monday. And so he let me have the shirt and I put it in there and scrubbed it up a little bit and rinsed it and put it on a hanger and let it drip dry. And the next Monday morning I put it on him. And he went to school, and he came home at noon, and he said, something don't smell good up at school. And I said, maybe it's one of the bathrooms. And he went back to school. And then when he came home, he said, I'm not going to back to school again if things keep stinking up there. And I said, well, what's stinking? He said, I don't know, but when I bend over to write or anything, something just stinks me, and I'm not going to school anymore. And I said, well, is it on your hands? I said, you better smell of your hands and go wash them. Maybe you've got something soiled on them. No, it's not on them. He says, I've already done that. And I said, well, did you step in something going up to school? Is it on your shoes? No. He says, it's not on my shoes. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, I don't know, but I'm not going up to school anymore. I'm not even going to go to school. And I said, well, you'll have to go to school. And I said, what have you got in your pockets? And he said, nothing. And he felt in his pants pockets. He said, I've got nothing but some marbles and a eraser or some little thing he had in there. I said, have you got anything in your shirt pocket? Did you put anything in there? And he says, no, not unless it was a horny toad. And I had washed that shirt with this horny toad in and just sudsed it up and down a few times. And they washed it easy. And then just drip dried it, rinsed it, and just drip dried it on a hanger and hung it up over the weekend and put it on him Monday. And it kept a stinking him. And he had caught this horny toad after school Friday and put it down in his pocket. And I'd washed it as soon as he came home. And he'd forgotten it, and I didn't know it. And so he finally decided we got the horny toad out and cleaned the shirt up pretty good, and he'd wear it again, and he'd go to school. I guess from the time he was a little baby, I made all of his clothes. I made all of his baby clothes, and then I made him little shirts and little short pants and things in the summertime. And so I made a lot of Cray's clothes, and he always looked quite cute in them. And he was a happy little boy. But when he was in the second grade, I noticed that he didn't act like he felt too good, because usually he was pleasant. He didn't cry. But now every little thing that went wrong, if you put some food on his plate that he didn't want, he'd cry. And if the kids did the least little thing to him, he'd cry for a day or two there, and it just wasn't like Cray. And I thought, I don't believe he feels good. And I kind of watched him for a day or two, but he kept just crying up. Every once in a while, it'd just He just was peevish, like he just didn't feel good. And one morning he got up, and he's sitting by the fire, and I happened to look at him right in the face, and it looked like his little eyes was kind of swollen a little bit to me. And I said, Cray, I believe your eyes are swollen a little bit. I said, maybe you've got a little touch of kidney trouble. And I said, when I was a little girl and used to have kidney trouble, or any mother suspected any of us were having a little problem that way, she used to scald a spoonful of cream of tartar in water, and then we'd cool it and drink it. I said, maybe if you drank some of that, you'd feel better. So I gave him a dose of that before breakfast, and he drank it. And the next morning he went to school. The next morning, when he woke up, his eyes looked even worse. And I said, Cray, before you go to the bathroom, I'm going to get a little glass here and take a sample of your urine and see if there's any trouble. And I caught it, and I was shocked. I was just flabbergasted. It was just about like coffee, just about the color of strong coffee. And it was deer season time again. It seemed like deer season time always interfered with my raising the kids with any help from Herman. But Herman hadn't got away. And before he left, he was planning to go, and then he just had this one day of hunting. On this Tuesday, I guess, was the last day of hunting, and then he was going back to, or maybe it was Monday, and he was going to hunt Monday and then go back to Grand Canyon to work on Tuesday. But anyhow, I said, Herman, you just can't go until you take this kid to the doctor. Oh, he said, he don't need to go to the doctor. And I said, well, he does. Just look at this. Oh, just doctoring. And I said, I think he needs to go over to the doctor. Oh, he said, just take care of him. And I said, Herman, you cannot go until you take this kid to the doctor. I guess that's about the strongest language I'd ever used. I guess the end of the tape, you've probably heard that we did take him to the doctor. And after Dr. Duggins had examined him and talked with me a little bit, he agreed that he did have a kidney problem. And so he gave him a shot and some medicine. And he said that he could still go to school. And then he said to come back in about 10 days. Herman went on and did his hunting. I think there was a few tags yet to be filled, and the family could use the meat. And then he went back to the Grand Canyon. And I was just real faithful in doing everything the doctor told me, and of giving him his medicine, and just as prompt and right on the minute. But he didn't seem to get any better. And in a couple of days, he was unable to even keep anything on his stomach. And I hadn't been sending him to school. I knew he was too sick to go to school. When Cray was sick, he had the most peaked look out of his eyes. You could always tell if he didn't feel good. And I just didn't send him up to school. But I took him back to Duggins again. And he changed his medicine. He said, well, I'll try this other medicine and see if it does better. I'll bring him back in another 10 days, but he can still go to school. And I said, well, doctor, this little boy can't even keep his food down. How can he go to school? And he said, well, mother, if it makes you feel any better, keep him home from school. And so I did, and in a day or two, his face began to swell, and he just looked like Humpty Dumpty, and his whole body began to swell. And I just got so scared I didn't know what to do. I had him over there twice, and he still was just getting worse and worse. And then I could tell that he was going into convulsions or some kind of a spasm of some kind. And so Mother Pollock came by, and she came in, and I wanted her to see him.
And she said, oh, I believe we had better get him over to the doctor again. And I said, well, that was what I was thinking. Will you stay with him while I go talk to May and see if she'll take us over? And she said, yes, she'd sit by. And we hurried and got him into his clothes and his pajamas that he was in his little bed in. May had this good car, and she was a good driver, and she was willing to go. And so we went, and he just went into one convulsion after another all the way, and he just rolled his eyes right back till all you could see was white and just stiffen up and bow up his back. And I was praying out loud all the way, and May was driving 90 miles an hour. She says, I don't care if a cop arrests us. We've got to get this big little boy to the doctor. And I said, I know it, and I just prayed that the Lord would bless him to hold out long enough that we could get him there and get some medical help with him along with our prayers. And we took him in and told the doctor he had to see him right straight. And so Dr. Duggins took him right in. He tested his heart. He tested his reflexes and a little bit of testing he did. And I said, how is he, doctor? And he just held up his fingers and crossed them and moved them back and forth. He said, that's all he would tell me. And he said, we'll do what we can. He said, where's his father? I said, he's down in the Grand Canyon. And he said, you'd better send for him. And Mother had got alarmed in the meantime, and Dad had come home, and she'd had him come on over with her. And she came in the hospital, and she said to Dr. Duggins, how's he doing, doctor? And the doctor looked at her and just crossed his fingers again. And he said, if it had been 5 minutes later, his heart would never have held out. And he said, all we can do is just what we've got here to treat him with, and hope and watch and pray. And that's what we did. Well, Herman came. By the time Herman got in from Grand Canyon, it was quite late. Mother and Dad had called him to come. And he came in the night, I think it was, and Cray was
Now come some of my memories about our youngest living son, Geffery R. Pollock, who came to us on the October the 19th, 1952, right on our 20th anniversary. Naturally, his father and I thought we had surely been blessed with the world's choicest anniversary present, as we surely were. We still think that. And a mother always finds room, no matter how many children, for another one in her schedule, her work, and most of all in her heart. And I was so pleased to have him, having gone through a few problems after Cray, such as a miscarry, operation, and quite a bit of misgiving, wonder or not whether I'd ever really be able to get another child. So I was thrilled about it. But I was rather apprehensive because Dr. Duggins had wanted me not to ever have any more children. And he wanted to fit me with some kind of a diaphragm or something, and I just said no. And he said, I didn't know there was a woman on the world left like you. And he said, I hope, and he he profaned, that I never have to deliver you again after the hard birth that he'd had with Cray. He said, don't you know that you have 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 times as hard a time at birth as a normal birth? Well, we were still very happy when we found out we were going to get a new baby. But I just felt that Dr. Duggins was the only one that could safely bring my baby to the world. He knew my condition. He knew the shape of my bones and my problem and why I had such hard deliveries. And I just didn't want another new doctor to have to find that out. But he was being threatened that he was going to be drafted into the service. And so I just really hated to go and ask him to be my doctor again. But I finally just faced him and told him that I was pregnant again and I wanted him to deliver me. And of course, he couldn't, or he didn't refuse. And I felt really quite consoled when I left his office because he was so sweet and good about it, and he didn't, really cuss me out or anything like I thought he probably would. And at that time, I was getting older, and I felt pretty good when I left his office because he told me that he'd had word that he wouldn't be drafted into the service. Now with my last living son, Geffery, I haven't even told you that through all my 9 pregnancies, I never once had morning sickness or lost a meal or had anything like a kidney infection or any complications. And this brings me to realize that even though I did have dangerous and hard deliveries, my kind Heavenly Father compensated by not letting me suffer some of the things I could have done during pregnancy. Well, my dear Geffery, as I was saying, you were born October the 19th, 1952, in the old hospital in the center of town in Panguitch, Garfield County, Utah. And it was a little past midnight, between 12:30 and 1 o'clock in the morning. And the same as when Cray was born. It was deer season again. And Herman was really anxious for me to get this baby so that he could go with the guys